Hi there, everyone. Good evening. Look at that, a little bit of a hand off screen. Hopefully, everyone out there in Cyberland is doing okay. My name is Sonia. I hope everyone can hopefully hear me. Oh, well, hopefully. If not, I don't know, give me a comment. Let me know if the audio is kind of not all right. But hopefully the audio is okay. Hopefully you're okay. Hopefully I'm okay. Hope we're all okay. But once again, hello and good evening. Welcome to tonight's session of our virtual tour series here with Show Me Seattle. We have done a couple of virtual tours the past couple of weeks. So if you are someone that's coming back from the week previous, thanks so much and welcome back. And if you're a new face here on our channel, thanks so much. Thanks for coming in. For tonight's particular tour, we're going to be talking a little bit about public art through our Seattle city streets. And basically why it's so important to us as a city. It is something to note that the actual city of Seattle, it is the only city that has the amount of public or city artwork when compared to other large cities. So something that we kind of hold close to our heart, our little claim to fame. But we are going to take a good little dive within the next hour and just kind of figure out why art is so important to us here in Seattle. And then kind of flip that idea, turn it on its head, and kind of figure out how are we learning how to navigate art during an interesting time such as COVID and the pandemic, and what that means on how to keep our city, looking beautiful. So when we talk about public art, in the most broadest sense of that word public, we will probably take a look at a couple of pieces that maybe exist on private property, but the public can still see. For example, our Lenin statue that is over in Fremont, as well as we might open up that scope to more of an architectural feel as we start to look at some pieces that exist within Seattle. For example, our public library or even the Space Needle, which we will talk about at length a little bit later on in the tour. But just to get you guys just a little ramped up about some of the artwork that we will see for tonight, we will talk just a little bit about our first piece of artwork right here, our lovely red heart that has the word jaw located inside of it. It is actually from an artist that is a Seattle-based artist. Their name is Jacoby. The jaw actually stands for the words Jacoby Artworks. And if any of my local Seattleites are tuning in, they hopefully maybe have seen some around our Seattle city streets. There are about 1,000 of them that do exist. And they run anywhere down the interurban trail as far north as Everett, all the way as far south to about Greenwood. So just a little bit of an idea of some of the artwork, and some of the pieces that we'll get to talk about a little bit later on. But let's hop right in. So before we kind of talk about art, and even in its broadest sense, we kind of have to get to the question of what is it, and why do we care so much about it, and why is it so important? We all have our young kids that will go to school and they'll go to a Smithsonian or go to a museum. We ask them, well, what did you like? What was your favorite part of the museum? And in its most basic form, there is a director of arts at the University of Washington. His name is Richard Andrews, and he basically states that art should engage, right? Art should get you to sit down and kind of take a deeper thought about what does it make you feel? Why do you feel that way? It should elicit a response. Maybe it makes you happy. Maybe it makes you cry because it touches you so much. Maybe it makes you angry. How dare somebody think that's art? But this is really that broadest term that we talk about when we think about art. Art should bring us hopefully together to start a conversation. It's subjective, which means people take different things away from art. And there's so many different mediums to choose from, just something that we kind of touched upon with architecture's art, or, different multiple mediums, whether that be food or something else. So keep those ideas and beliefs in mind as we start to continue through the tour. What does it make you feel? What kind of response does it elicit from you? And why should it matter to the community at large? So as we get ready to talk about art, we got to talk about where it all began, at least for Seattle. In terms of our actual city, in terms of colonization within our Western standard, we're quite young when compared to our Eastern counterparts. But for our Native Americans, they have been within the Pacific Northwest for more than 10,000 years. So it's wonderful in our modern day to see that there is still some realm of Native American culture and art that still resonates within our community. We talk about when we talk about the totem pole, which is what we are taking a look at right now on the screen, we have to mention Native Americanness in its broadest sense. Totem carving isn't done in Seattle. It's within other villages and different locations, but that idea of Native Americanness is still something that is very central to Seattle, which is really great. So we go back to 1899 when we had a couple of Seattle businessmen that were up in Alaska. And I want to say it's the Tiklit. I apologize if my pronunciation is absolutely atrocious. But they were in a small village in Alaska where they saw this 50-foot totem pole standing in front of them. And they said, this thing's gorgeous. This would look so good in Seattle. So we're gonna take it. Just put it on the boat, put it on the ship. We're gonna bring it back to Seattle. And they stole it. Yeah, that's it's legitimately true. The villagers were not pleased. Naturally, these businessmen that had come in and literally just stolen their totem pole out of their village, and so they were kind of like, okay, so what are you gonna do about it? So the businessmen paid them about $500 and they kind of called it square, which was kind of interesting. Apparently, the villagers must not have been all that upset because back in 1938, it was actually burned down by an arsonist. And the actual villagers actually just built a brand new replica and put it in place of the old one. So I guess it must have all been square, which is kind of cool. Uh, Totem poles always tell a story from top to bottom. Typically, the most northern part of the actual totem actually tells the viewer where that totem pole actually came from, which village it belongs to. And from there, each structure within the totem helps to kind of round out the story along with the actual depiction of the beings that are on the totem. The colors play a very integral part as well. Most of the time, you'll see a lot of that green paint that is on a lot of totems. That green is to signify almost like greenery, trees, lush land. Sometimes the red that you'll see right along the snout, just of this individual, sometimes can underscore maybe blood or strife, something of magnitude. But it's wonderful to think that every small detail, every nuance on this actual totem pole tells a piece of a story. And we do have other totems that are located throughout Seattle. There are two that are located in Victor Steinberg Park and Pike Place Market, as well as there is a totem that is located up at Seattle Center near the Space Needle. So it's just a wonderful touch. For a lot of our Native American tribes within Seattle, they do more of carving work. So it's a little bit smaller in scale. If we've had anybody that has taken one of our city tours before, when we visit the Hiram Chittenden the locks with the salmon ladder, there's typically a gentleman that's normally sitting along that small trail and he's normally carving wood and he loves to tell visitors the story behind the tribe as well as the history that it plays for them. So it's just wonderful just to see Native Americanness is still very prominent within Seattle. As we talk about our Native American tribes, I think it's probably a given, hopefully, that we should probably talk about the man who our city is actually named after, Chief Seattle. Seattle as a city is one of the only, I believe, cities that's named after an indigenous character here in the United States. And there is something to be said about Chief Seattle as a person. The name for him, Seattle, is kind of his colonized slash westernized, as they call it, name. His name was originally Chief Seal. For most folks, it was hard to kind of pronounce that drawl, the Seal. So Seattle was a bit more easier to enunciate. That, and within Native American belief in history, when you speak that Native American name, you do summon their spirit. And he didn't want his spirit to be summoned. So hopefully I'm not saying it too many times. But he was a wonderful individual. He really is the person who helped make our city happen. Like I was talking about earlier, from a colonized perspective, we are quite young. Our original colonizers came way to the Pacific Northwest by that of the Oregon Trail. They could have either gone south into California, or they could have gone north into what is our now modern day Pacific Northwest. So while they were on the trail, there were murmurs that, oh, there's so much trees and land. It's so green. And so one of the Denny brothers of the Denny party actually ventured north, and when he arrived, he was astounded by all of the greenery that he could see for miles on. So many trees, right? They could start a logging company. They could start an industry here. There really wasn't anybody to govern over them either. So they kind of do what they want. You know what I mean? It's wonderful. So he called for the rest of the party to come and meet him on what is our now modern day Alki Point over in West Seattle. But unfortunately, while the rest of the party was coming, David cut his leg while he's trying to build a house. And so in November, once they arrived, basically it was raining, the cabin wasn't ready, and they had a really rough mention of it. So they were on this beachy, sandy like quality of land, and they were out in the middle of the elements. There's nothing to assist them. And Chief Seal kind of came out and, it's kind of said, "Oh, you guys look like you're having a really rough go at it. I might be able to help you." For Chief Seal himself, he is a blend between two of the different tribes within our Native American cultures that were there at the time, the Duwamish, which was the people of the inside, quote unquote, and the Suquamish, the people of the clear salt water. It's wonderful that this that soft-ish at the end of a lot of Native American tribes that exist in Seattle. So Suquamish, Snohomish, it just means of the water, people of the water. And it's really fun, as you guys will see in this next clip, it's really fun to see that belief and idea of the water still played in themes throughout today, which is really great. So the small mural that you folks actually saw is down by Shill Shoal Beach, which is north of our downtown Seattle core. But it is, like I said, it's all folded into what makes Seattle the city that it is. For Chief Seattle, he was a mix of two different tribes, but he was a blend in the largest sense of people, and which was really great. He really was this bridge that helped the colonizers really start to get to know the Native American tribes that existed on this land. And Chief Seale really asked both tribes to please assist the colonizers, befriend them, show them a way of life here. And I'm sure the colonizers probably learned as much in turn as well from their Native American brothers and sisters. So as we look at the different pictures that we have on our screen right here, to the far left, we do have a bust that is actually of Chief Seattle. It was made back in 1909. We, as a city, were getting ready for our World's Fair in 1909, and with that brought a huge thrum of fountains and sculptures and statues. And they said, "Listen, we need something with Chief Seattle on it. So help us out." So basically, the artist, James Wen, he was working on the statue. This was the intention, was just the statue. But he's like, well, I mean, like, I got a bust. Does that work? And they're like, yeah, sure, that's okay, that's fine, we'll take it. So the actual piece that's on the left in 1909 was just the bust of Chief Seattle, and in 1912 the actual completed piece is what you see on the right. For the piece on the left, this is actually supposed to be a fountain. Seattle is well known for many of the fountains that we actually have throughout our city limits, more so than any other city, but they're not like your standard fountains where it's like on the East Coast where it looks super robust and very picturesque. So some of our fountains don't look like fountains, which makes it even more intriguing to the eye. So the piece on the left is actually a fountain, but it's a bust of Chief Seattle in Pioneer Square, whereas the statue, the fully completed statue of Chief Seattle, is basically in Tillicum Place, which is at the northern part of downtown Seattle near Seattle Center. That actual word, Tillicum, it's a Chinook jargon, but basically stands for the word everyone. So when you speak it, and especially for this beautiful person, Chief Seattle, in the middle of this place for everyone, your friend, your relative, um, even a fellow nation. It's supposed to be a place where people come together. So there's literally a small plaque that literally says "A firm friend of whites." So I mean, we've got to give so much credit where credit is due. Without Chief Seattle, we definitely wouldn't be the city that we are today. So we've mentioned briefly, just a moment, uh, the World's Fair that happened in 1909. So we keep bouncing back and forth with this idea of our Eastern counterparts. You know, they're well more established. Maybe they've got a little bit more money. Maybe they've got a little bit more of a visual eye for aesthetics. So, you know, they kind of know what the people like to see. For Seattle, as a budding city, we don't have that foundation yet. So a lot of the artwork that we acquired within our first 50 some odd years as a city was through a lot of private funding, through private groups that really commissioned for art. We really had to kind of we got to put a lot of thought behind it to get it off the ground. And so by the time we had gotten to 1909, this was really our chance to kind of show the US, hey man, like we can make a statue or two. You know, we got a bust or two. We got some artwork that we can kind of throw around. And it really kind of sparked that little ember that was kind of growing, but was really hard to get off the ground for us to want some art in our city. For one of the examples that we do have, it's a statue of George Washington. The actual fair itself did happen on the campus on the University of Washington, and basically we put that statue there of George Washington back then in 1909, which is kind of neat. So now we've got some gumption. Now we got people coming to Seattle. They've seen a little bit of art, but what else can we do to get more? Like we want more. We want to look good. And so for the next particular part of the tour, it gets pretty historical, uh, but it will lead us back to art in Seattle. I promise you. So stay with me. It's a little roundabout. It's a little roundabout way to get to explain why it's so important to us, but it does absolutely make sense. If it were not for FDR, I am not quite sure that Seattle would have such a foothold that it does within its city limits. Uh, FDR, we got to give him a ton of credit. I mean, he really had a rough go at a lot of things in the past. So, you've got to imagine a four-term president, the only president with that length, that longevity. Uh, so we've got a four-term president. He's got a lot of personal physical ailments that are coming his way. He's got the depression. He's got World War II. And he's really just trying to find anything that he can to assist life for the American people to make it simpler. And so, for those that don't know, hopefully you do, but FDR, he started his political career in New York, and he really wanted to start these new programs to assist those that were really struggling through the depression due to the stock market crash. And so he helped with unemployment. He he helped with farmers to basically how you say he wanted to lower their tax, which was great. And the American people were very impressed by this. They're like, okay, we see a person here who's going to fight for us, who wants better for us, and he's doing something about it. So, with these new programs in place and slowly starting to build and really gain some traction in New York, he slowly started to work his way up into that nominational ticket for his presidency. And so when he earned the ticket, the nomination for presidency, he pledged to the American people in person, which at this time was never heard of. Like people are like, what's and he just looked at him outright and he said straight to him, I pledge to you, I pledge to myself that this is going to be a new deal for the American people. He was passionate behind this belief that he could start new programs that would help the American people. So, what does that mean? Wow, great. Yep, New Deal programs, awesome. But what does it have to do with art? Why do we even care about this? Don't worry, we're getting there. So, one of the programs that was underneath the New Deal, what was known as the Works Progress Administration. So back in 1933, underneath what was known as the WPA, that's a shorthand for it, one of the programs was the Federal Art Project of the Works Progress Administration. Super long name, I know, crazy. But throughout the course of a decade, this project basically allowed the federal government to pay over 1,000 artists, craftsmen, teachers, people to create artwork for public buildings. This is awesome. This is wonderful because now for the people of Seattle, where we had to raise our own funds through private commissions and endorsements, now the government is saying, hey, we got you. Don't worry about the money. Just build the art. We want to see the art. It looks great. And this was great. This was wonderful. It was such this sigh of relief amongst the people that we were like, we still get to make our city beautiful. Now, that that program is just the cement of the foundation. What it also in turn does is it adds the brick, and it says, okay, there is an art and architecture program that also goes in hand with this program. So the art and architecture program says that 1% of your construction costs of a federal building, it should be used to purchase contemporary art for said structure. Okay, so now we've got specific money that is set aside within a project that is dedicated to art. Awesome. Okay, so Seattle's like, all right, We can do that. We can commission some artwork. That's fine. And so one of the pieces here that you folks are seeing is actually one installment of an 11 painting series that was made from the artist Kenneth Callahan. It was commissioned for what was known then as a Marine Hospital, but now in its modern day, it's called the Pacific Tower. Sits at the top of Beacon Hill. There are about several pieces that still exist to this day within that building. However, most people know Kenneth Callahan's work from the engine room, which is located in the MOHI, the Museum of History and Industry, that's located down in South Lake Union. So 11 wonderful pieces that were commissioned during the WPA, and a few of them that we still know live and breathe within its city streets today, which is awesome. So now we have been getting help. We've been getting help putting art in our streets. We look wonderful. And now we are starting to change. We're starting to change the idea. We're starting to change the outlook. And we're saying, okay, if we have really cool, interesting, pretty art, people want to come and see it. Okay, so if people want to come to see our city, we have to have really fun businesses here. People want to make money. Okay, so that works. So now art and kind of business, they're starting to go a little hand in hand, which is really cool if you think of it. So people are like, how can we get art to entice people to come to Seattle? How can we get art to entice people to spend their money here and see us as a city that can, hold its own against the like of any other major city? And this is where things start to get really fun. Because now, this country as a whole, we're starting to talk about space. And we want to know about Sputnik. And we want to know about astronauts. And our president primarily wants to know about space. And he's pretty for it. He's pretty for it. He really likes space. So we were like, okay, I mean, yeah, we like space. We can do space too. Yeah, absolutely. We know space. Of course we know space. So now we really started to put some belief, some traction behind this idea of how can we get art to get people to come here? How can it happen? And so now, even from the mid 1950s, Seattle as a city, we were really thinking about trying to get an exposition, trying to get something here to bring foot traffic. But now things are really heading off. So we talk and we talk and we plan, and we're getting ready for our Century 21 exposition, our World's Fair. But 2 years prior to the actual fair starting, Seattle has something pretty huge that happens to it. They get a general donation and a gift trust fund set up. And what this does is it allows the city to receive private gifts of art and money to purchase arts. Now, this is pretty great because this trust fund and the donation fund is set up, Seattle raises over $750,000 for the exposition. So now we've got pieces of artwork that are being donated. We're buying art. We're like, let's beautify the city. People are coming. This is amazing. And it's great. We're super excited. We're like, we look good. We're talking about space. Maybe the president might come. You never know. And we are for it. This is great. So as we are slowly ramping up to get ready for our World's Fair, there's just this murmur. There's just this murmur about the president coming. So we gotta have something big if the president's gonna come here, right? You gotta have something massive. So if you guys look to the left, this is nice little cute scribble. Looks really like nothing, right? If I saw it, I'd probably just crumple it up and chuck it into a trash can. Use tissue. However, this doodle is actually on a small napkin, and it was drawn by the person by the name of Edward Carlson. So Edward Carlson, he was a Seattle hotel exec. And while he was on vacation or maybe business work in Germany, he actually caught sight of a broadcast tower while he was in Germany. And he was like, man, that looks so cool. That looks so nice. And he's like, Seattle could do that. We could build that. Seattle could build that. No, hands down. Absolutely. And so on that little napkin, he drew his little doodle and he said, I got something that's going to change Seattle. I got something that's going to change the way we think about our city, the way people see our city. And this is it, the Space Needle. This is what's going to change us. And from there, that is where it all starts. So we keep talking about JFK, JFK. Man, oh man, do we want JFK to come to Seattle, right? So JFK was supposed to come. He's supposed to come to open up the fair. And I mean, he kind of did. He kind of did open up the fair, but he opened it over the phone from Florida. So Seattle was like, oh, I mean, okay, maybe he missed the opening. That's fine. Well, maybe he'll close the fair. Maybe he'll come in October and he'll close out the fair. And the president said that he would. That was great. Everyone's like, yeah, okay. President's going to come to Seattle. Woo. And then all of a sudden, he fell ill. He fell ill and he said that he couldn't come. Unfortunately, as history will later tell us now in our modern day, he was dealing with the Cuban Missile Crisis. But for Seattle as a city, we was feeling kind of slighted. We didn't care what the reason was. He didn't show up. Long story short. So there was always this belief that we had totally wanted to impress the president. We totally wanted him to come to see the Space Needle, and it had never happened. But that isn't exactly the case. JFK did happen to see the Space Needle in person, but it wasn't finished. So in November, basically the year prior to the fair opening up, JFK was in Seattle. He was in Seattle, and he was there to do a speech at the University of Washington. And so as they're making their way to the university, he was like, can we make a little pit stop? Can we swing by I really want to check out this business. And so they actually detoured, and he did happen to drive by the Space Needle right down at the very base. Now, he had wanted to stop the motorcade. He wanted to stop initially and hop on out, and security was not having it. They're like, listen, we humored you enough to bypass. You're not getting out. So he happened to just drive on by, and that was that. So I'm pretty sure everyone's probably like, well, how do we know it's the truth? I mean, how do we know it's real? I mean, no one has proof, right? There's no proof, right? Well, actually, there is. So there was actually a photographer who was assigned to actually capture a lot of the construction that was happening with the Space Needle. And on the day in November of 61, when JFK drove by, this photographer actually caught a snapshot of him in the motorcade as he drove past the Space Needle. So the photographer's name is George Golachek, and he couldn't believe it. Even in his own notes, he's like, I'm pretty sure I just saw the president drive by. He didn't stop, but he definitely drove by. Crazy. So there's proof that to some idea, JFK really got to see some of that passion behind the project that really changed our skyline. And I think it lit a fire in him. And I think he wanted to be on that side of history where he got to say that he had to have a little piece of that. And I think that's kind of interesting. So even from when we went back to FDR, now it's almost kind of reestablished in 1962 under Kennedy's administration, that the U.S. General Services would institute a program that required it, not like, oh, okay, maybe. It required allocation of 0.5% of federal building renovation and construction. Those budgets, they have to go to artwork. So interesting to see, so interesting to think about. We're still building the small foundations of things that help beautify our city. And some of those pieces, honestly, can still be seen today. Ronald Bladen's The Black Lightning, which is located down at the base of the Space Needle, it is still there. That is a piece that was funded through the National Endowment of the Arts. Kind of great. And with that assistance, Washington now is starting to become the front runner in getting arts through the Arts Commission. And so from here, we've had groups in Seattle that have slowly had some names for art, so change for art. But now we're starting to see uh, actual programs and actual administrations established within Seattle that really assist to this belief that we are going to include art in every piece of land that we touch. So in 1967, they created a group, which in its modern day is now known as For Culture. I have to say it very slowly because if I try to rush through it, I just mumble my way. But For Culture, they are a group that will remember the name because it's going to come back at a later time, but they're very important. They are established in 1967. And now Seattle's starting to become the nation's first for a couple of these things in regards to architecture, buildings, and art. Because the group that is now known as For Culture, it's the nation's first publicly funded county arts agency. That's really cool. Now, also in 1973, our 1% for art, which is now an ordinance, is enacted. So we've talked about the half of 1% or the half of 1% or for federally funded buildings. But now this particular ordinance, it's solidifying that the plan is that 1% of funds is set aside for select installment of artwork in public spaces. It's an ordinance. You have to follow it. Now, for that particular ordinance, the 1% ordinance, we're not the first. We're not the first to pass that ordinance. However, we are the first in regards to that ordinance for what is called public utility. What that means is whatever art is chosen for a particular building or space or concept, it has to speak to the people of Seattle. It has to be something beneficial to the community. It has to engage. It has to spark a conversation. And that is the first time within our history as a country that Seattle saying it's our responsibility as a city to engage the Seattleite, the average Seattleite. Why does art matter? Why does this particular art matter? And what does it speak to our city? Kind of cool. Wonderful. Now, we've got that ordinance. And then, of course, 1974, we got the Art in Public Places program. We are only the second state to establish this law. There's got to be art everywhere. We got a public place, put some art in it. It's fine. It's wonderful. We like it. It's great. So this is cool. We're doing wonderful. This is awesome. We love art. We're finally seeing like some hard ordinances, some hard laws being put down to ensure that we keep the city beautiful. But what does it mean for the artists? What does it mean for art? Remember, we said art can mean anything. And truly, as anybody knows in Seattle, we are an eclectic city. We like it to look weird and be different. It's really our thing. It's really our jam. So now with our ordinance from 1974, art in public places, it basically just kind of stated when a construction project is started, they're going to partner with an arts commission that will specifically select both the interior and exterior artwork. So this really opens the door to style. This is whatever the artist thinks will speak to what the building is or what the people think about it. This is a wonderful idea, and it opens the door because you're not held to any particular, I mean, really any particular sort of standard. So we've seen a lot of abstract pieces that, really kind of, you're kind of like, okay. But I mean, for example, just some of the pieces that are located on this particular slide, we've got photography, we've got Sasquatch on the far left, who exists in our Flat Stick pub down in South Lake Union. Beautiful, you know, sculptures that we've slowly started to see from, George Washington in 1909 to our statue here down in down in Pioneer Square, which pays honor to our Great Fire that happened in yesteryear. So we really run the gamut, which is really kind of great. But like I said, we really ask the question: when does architecture start to embody art? When do the lines kind of and we really see that with a lot of our new buildings that are being built up within our Amazon campus. If you folks tuned in last week for Dan's virtual tour, we kind of play on this idea of the spheres. It's a building in the middle of literally like a downtown metro, but it looks nothing like any of the buildings surrounding it, and neither is it supposed to act like any other building that is surrounding it. It's functional, but in a broad sense, it's art, which is really this really fun, weird idea that we play with. Up in the top right hand corner, we've got these big rock type formations that were created by an artist. Her name's Julie Spidell. That last name might sound familiar for a lot of my locals. For the Spidells, they are the folks that have the underground tour down in Pioneer Square. But Julie actually named the installation Petros, which is actually supposed to replicate rock formation from 14,000 years ago when we were just glacier, when we were ice. It is beautiful. There's so many different pieces throughout Seattle that really just touch upon every historical aspect or piece of our geological structures. If you are totally in tune with learning about rock and formation and glacier and the Pacific Northwest, even so much outside of city limits, please, 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 please make sure you tune in next week. Our other guide, DC, he's going to have a wonderful tour about Mount Rainier. But I mean, Seattle Lights, we really embrace every singular nuance that makes our city our city. We love it. We think it's wonderful, and it's interesting to see how we can kind of have architecture embody art, how art tells a story, how art can explain a building in a city. We're going to go on to the next slide, which is going to basically show you a video that really talks about that idea. So right outside of the alley, wants you to kind of take that journey with yourself and oftentimes with other people as well. There's another prominent piece of his that exists right down near Alaska Way, near the Olympic Sculpture Park. And this piece is called Echo. Most people, as they drive down, Broad, heading onto Alaska Way, they swing right by it, and they're like, "Oh, I don't even know what that is." And the the story behind the actual headpiece is that she is replicating a nymph, very talkative nymph, who unfortunately she gets in trouble. She gets in trouble with the goddess Hera, and the goddess basically says to her, "You are not allowed to speak unless you're echoing something that you've heard." And this idea to Plensa, he it really had him sit and think, because he was like, how many times do we talk, 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 talk? How many times are we talking from our true thought and self? And how many times are we just repeating what we've heard from other people? And so it's never to spark an argument, it's always to start a conversation. And he explains that her facial expression is soft, it's neutral, because when he wants you to see it, he wants you to mimic, right? He wants you to mimic her expression, that soft and that neutral. And he's like, I want you to take a moment and just sit with yourself and really ask the question, are you being your authentic self, or are you just kind of thinking someone else's thoughts and you're just kind of going with the flow? And this idea is something that's so interesting now as we start to venture into this topic, of course, of our lives throughout the course of this year. So I'm sure, and anyone would probably agree, I'm sure that no one could have anticipated all that has occurred this year, right? How do we get through it? And this is where the idea that art makes you stop and kind of internalize and make you ask the deep rooted questions. This is what art does during a time when there is no answer. There truly is no answer. There's no right or wrong way right now, that everyone is just learning to kind of get through it. But what does that mean for our city? We go in on our next slide, and you'll start to see that our once beautiful, vibrant, bustling city that has beautiful glass storefronts and has, maybe fashion or maybe clothing or, maybe what have you, it's now just being shown as blank boards of wood. Bustling, dynamic city, we are not used to planks of wood. This is not our jam. This is not our thing. So what do we do? Because we've always been kind of innovative. We've always been kind of different and interesting. How do we make something out of nothing? Because it's literally what we do. And so in the start of April of 2020, I myself, just walking through the streets of Seattle, I'm starting to see all these planks of wood start to get covered by little pieces of art. And I'm like, okay, I see what you're doing here, Seattle. I see what you're going on. And you start to see small words that say love, or we start to get back to that guerrilla style artwork that we talked about at the very first slide with Jacoby Artworks. We start to see just boxes and colors and symbolism, and maybe not symbolism, but just covering up the wood with color, maybe in its most simple form. And then we run it down to getting a little bit more busy. Okay, starting to look pretty fancy now. Now we're starting to build an idea. Now we're starting from our foundation. Now we're really getting into the skyscraper vision of what can we do with art to change our dynamic. And it's a really tough time. So as this idea starts to culminate, starts to build, now we step in the Alliance for Pioneer Square. The Alliance for Pioneer Square, they existed well before the pandemic, well before COVID-19. They were founded back in 2010, but their main goal is to basically keep Pioneer Square authentic, engaging, and dynamic. Wonderful words, really great words. And so, one other interesting thing to note about the Alliance for Pioneer Square, they are funded in part by the For Culture lodging tax. So there they are coming back again. It all seems to come full circle for us, which is wonderful. We start our journey in Pioneer Square, where we first established as a city, and now we're slowly working our way back. You'll check in this next video. We're slowly working our way back down the streets of Pioneer Square, and you'll start to see a little bit of a change. And you'll start to see that we are starting to take full advantage now of the wooden planks that have been covering business fronts. Because if we can't get rid of the wood, obviously, unfortunately, these companies, they can't reopen right now or due to social distancing. Most of the stores within Pioneer Square, they're very small. They're very small, very intimate. And typically for Pioneer Square, that's a wonderful thing. It really adds to this ambiance of the shopping or dining. There's a lot of dining restaurants, but it adds to the experience. But when you have, city ordinances where there's social distancing, or you can't have food open, or it is delivery only, it really makes it difficult for businesses to be able to sustain and to basically be able to keep a business afloat. So, it's interesting to see that even if you can't have your business open, you can still share a little bit of the goodness along the way, which is.
Car, and she's like, you know what I noticed? She was like, nobody doesn't go.
So essentially, these artists that basically have painted over the wood uh, from the stores in Pioneer Square, they're commissioned. They're commissioned through the actual Pioneer Square, that little community, and then they are basically allowed to come down. And I want to say they have artistic freedom for whatever they would like to show, essentially, down the streets of Pioneer Square. The actual mural project itself was started back on April 14th of this year. And basically, just from their website, it literally just says it's meant to bring joy and a spot of brightness to the neighborhood during a trying time. So I'm telling you, something out of nothing for any other city might seem like a truly hard concept, but literally for the city of Seattle, this for us is like, it's nothing. You know what I mean? We are such a resilient group that we will learn to just turn on the lights when it seems like, man, there's no electricity in the house. What's going on? So slowly from Pioneer Square, we start to see this growth of artwork on wood kind of spread. And then for any of my Seattleites down within West Lake Center, our shopping corridor, you start to see that there's some super wonky, crazy concepts to, frogs that are all tripped out. Or maybe we get back to our fundamental roots with our Native Americans, where we see a lot of depictions here with Mount Rainier, or, even a shameless plug for a Happy Meal or two. But, whether it is a mural that pays homage to one of our artists, there's always something beautiful to catch in those tiny little nuances of each mural. There is something that speaks to every person. And I think we start to build off of the small details to the bigger uh symbolism. I want to say not even symbolism, but just this idea that there's going to be a turn, right? We have been such a strong city. We love our art, we love our people, we love our culture and our history, that in this present time, in the here and now, it will turn. It's coming. It's hard right now, but the sun will always follow the rain. And I think that is really the beauty behind this foothold that artwork has. It has Art has Seattle in its grasp, and it's in such a good way. Such even in graffiti and sometimes that weird kind of kerclunk, and you're like, I don't know who drew this, but okay, you do you, say what you need to say. I mean, that's kind of cool. All right. But when we're dedicated to it and we're committed to it, there's something so wonderful in it that it gives you this hopefulness that eventually, by the end of the time that we get to whatever this looks like on the other side of it, that the art in our city made people happy and it brought people joy and it gave you just a small moment until we get to see each other again. So this is technically the last slide of our tour. I do want to leave you just with a small quote from our Chief Seattle. He says, "All things share the same breath, the beast, the tree, the man. The air shares its spirit with all the life it supports." I want to thank you all so much for hanging out with me on this hour as we took a look through some of our artwork. If you did miss last week's presentation, which was Dan's in regards to tech in Seattle, please feel free to visit our Facebook page. It also has from the week prior as well from Dan's. We have Elvis's presentation that was on one of our small suburbs, Fremont. Please make sure that you follow us on Facebook so you'll get notifications for next week's virtual tour, which will feature DC, as I previously mentioned. You guys are going to love it. I mean, it's going to be so cool. It's all about Mount Rainier, to the very smallest nuance and detail. So with that, as I say again, take care out there. Thank you so much for tuning in. On behalf of Show Me Seattle, my name is Sonia, and I hope you had a wonderful time and you learned a couple new things for the evening. So take care, everyone.